We just got quite a few interesting Starfield updates from Bethesda. Between some of the press releases and just news around the Microsoft Bethesda purchase, some of the ensuing interviews, or just additional details to come out in the wake of that purchase. And although a lot of this news is interesting at face value, none of the updates are super impactful at face value, but as you tie together some of these new statements by Bethesda employees or even some Microsoft employees with other information we've had before, this all becomes quite a bit more interesting. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. As I would say from several of these, they're actually pretty large or interesting updates around Bethesda's future titles, of course, the first of which being Starfield. If you guys enjoy the content, you can leave a like or get subscribed. I have a couple more videos on the whole Bethesda Microsoft transaction and ensuing news around that over the next couple of days planned. Otherwise, let's first take a look about the last time we heard about Starfield, because technically I never talked about this on the channel. Last we heard about this was back in August at Gamescom. Towards the end of the month, Pete Hines had a few things to say about it.
Look, my life would be a lot easier. Marcel's life and Eva's life would be a lot easier if we were ready to show and talk about what the team is working on. Anybody can do marketing when the game is ready to show, right?
Yeah,
Just show the game.
Right.
The game's not ready to show. There's not a whole hell of a lot we can do until it's ready. Like, I don't know. What do you want from me? The only thing that I can tell you, Gronk, is when we finally get around to it, we finally get around to talking about what it's up to, I think you will be impressed.
So really, nothing huge, new, or impactful, just that when the game is ready, they're going to actually talk about it, and a line we've consistently heard repeated that we'll be impressed when they finally do talk about it, that Starfield will be worth the wait, which of course isn't shocking to hear from the VP of PR and that's quite literally his job. But of course now, in the wake of the Microsoft purchase, we've heard Starfield mentioned quite a few additional times. You've probably heard how Starfield seemingly got a big engine upgrade. In his letter going over the Microsoft purchase, Todd Howard said, "These new systems are optimized for the vast worlds we love to create, with generational leaps not just in graphics, but CPU and data streaming as well. It led to our largest engine overhaul since Oblivion, with all the new technologies powering our first new IP in 25 years, Starfield, as well as the Elder Scrolls 6. And then in a separate interview with the Xbox team, he does describe a major engine rewrite.
I would say that it's a really exciting project that we've been doing for a long time. And once we got on the new systems, the things we found we could do. And so it's a major engine rewrite on that game.
So I think these two quotes in particular are just right off the bat actually pretty indicative of something. Going from Fallout 4 to Fallout 76, of course, the very memeable statement has been 16 times the detail. Fallout 76's world being described as this giant undertaking and a beautiful sight to witness. Of course, if you actually look at Fallout 4 versus Fallout 76, Fallout 76 does look a bit better, and actually some lighting changes that came a year after release did make a decent improvement, but the two games still look very, very similar, and even with just one or two mods, you could make Fallout 4 look nearly as good or even much better than 76. When you get terms like a major engine rewrite and the biggest change since Oblivion to Morrowind, those are far more concrete and actually measurable things, and as such, I would definitely expect significant changes to this engine for Starfield, and especially from Fallout 4 or Fallout 76 to Starfield. Bethesda reusing the engine has been quite the controversy, but in reality, this is pretty common among major game franchises, and in particular, one of the big incentives to continue to use this engine is mod support, the modability of it. Bethesda just sold for $7.5 billion. I wouldn't be shocked if mod support on Bethesda Game Studios titles contributed a decent amount to that overall valuation. Skyrim still has so many players, a big reason why is mods. But with that in mind, let's actually take a look at what changed from Morrowind to Oblivion. Considering this is the biggest engine upgrade since then, it should give us some context as to what we can expect or how large scale this will be. So one of the very obvious changes from Morrowind to Oblivion, you get to see the visual upgrade. Things look way better in Oblivion. One of the other big changes from the two games, in Morrowind, not every NPC was actually voiced, so you could go talk to an NPC and it would just be text responses, and at certain points, many NPCs would have identical text responses. Conversely, in Oblivion, basically everybody was voiced, and you had more dynamic responses from NPCs, although still a little flat and definitely still some repeats. NPC behavior saw a big overhaul between these two games. In Morrowind, NPCs would just kind of stand still or attack you. In Oblivion, they had their own schedules. They'd go to sleep, move around. NPCs actually got ragdoll physics and even items were movable. And then some other more casual features, the addition of map markers, fast travel, and even vehicles in the form of horses. And interaction with NPCs were overhauled, with the combat system being fundamentally different. In Morrowind, it was just spam attack and hopefully you get a good roll. In In Oblivion, if you actually landed a shot, you landed a shot, very similar to what you see in more modern games now. That's just a brief overview, but it should demonstrate somewhat that this was a fairly significant engine upgrade. To us, it all seems very simple, but imagine Bethesda games without fast travel or map markers. That is a huge fundamental feature, and adding that isn't just some small minor feat. But more importantly, I think the interactions with AI and other NPCs are the much bigger change. AI being voiced, having their own schedules, and just being a bit more dynamic overall was a big shift up between these two games. So with that in mind, now we have a better idea as to the scale of this new engine upgrade. What actually is getting changed? What do we know about what's being added for the new engine that has kind of been described as almost being for both Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6? I wouldn't be shocked if Starfield brings the giant engine upgrades, then with the Elder Scrolls 6 we start to see building upon those implemented features. But Starfield really bringing that larger scale overhaul or the next gen-ness of the engine. We know animation changes are coming, maybe we'll be able to actually use ladders, but that doesn't say a ton. When asked about the engine and what being next gen means for this game, Todd Howard describes how it's both a hardware and software thing. It means gameplay. What does the next generation of epic single player RPGs feel like to us? Expanding with, but it has a lot of new systems we've been thinking about for a while that fit the kind of game really well. With Starfield being a space game, you have to imagine those new systems are things like spaceships or gravity, perhaps even procedural generation for certain planets. There's been some leaked images of Starfield behind the scenes, and it definitely looks like a visually improved game, a notably better looking one than Fallout 4 76. But also, Todd Howard has mentioned that Bethesda is uniquely positioned to pull off this next gen upgrade with Starfield. What exactly he meant by that has been long speculated, and what these next gen big upgrades will be have also been long speculated. But we may have just gotten an interesting insight into this, as shortly after the news of Microsoft buying Bethesda came out, it was also revealed that Microsoft extended its license and partnership with OpenAI, this basically being one of the more advanced artificial intelligence APIs on the market. And although it's pure speculation as to whether or not these two are related, it is definitely a big coincidence that it would get announced on literally the same day. Obviously, the whole OpenAI thing got overshadowed a bit by the Bethesda news, but the addition of this to something like a Starfield could make significantly more sophisticated NPCs or just AI you encounter in general be an interesting mechanic, such as having more dynamic speech options. Now, of course, there does come some complications with voice acting. If you are having auto-generated messages by an AI, how are you going to voice act all of them? But in general, I wouldn't be shocked if AI is one of the major things we see upgraded in the Bethesda engine. If you think about AI from Skyrim to Fallout 76, there hasn't been huge changes or upgrades. Nothing like what we saw from Morrowind to Oblivion. So I definitely think this is one of the front runners for what we could see. But either way, putting this all into context, it definitely looks like the engine is getting a significant upgrade going forward, which does make Starfield pretty exciting. Hopefully this feels like a pretty true to form and large upgrade or change up, not just Fallout in space. Then we have this back and forth around exclusivity and Starfield being on Microsoft only or not, whether it's coming to PS5. There's been a rumor that the PS5 logo was actually removed from the Starfield website. This is fake. The Starfield website never featured any logos as far as I could tell, and no video evidence or even images have ever shown it on the website, so I'm pretty sure someone just made that up. And in the days following this announcement, we've basically gotten crumbs around exclusivity. We saw some quote-unquote insiders saying 100% it's going to be a Xbox and PC exclusive, not come to PS5. We saw statements from Todd Howard and even Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, discussing how one of their big goals is to actually bring games to as many people as possible. Todd Howard mentioning how it doesn't matter what controller you're using. Phil Spencer just mentioning broadly that they really want to broaden the scope of who can play games and where, when. But this is likely more so in reference to Game Pass, which Starfield has loosely been confirmed as being a day one option on Game Pass. Microsoft saying in their statement following the Bethesda acquisition that they plan to bring many Bethesda games to Game Pass on day one, and then immediately mentioning Starfield after that. And we've already seen how Doom Eternal is coming to Game Pass just a few days after this news has broke. The only concrete comment we have on exclusivity is Xbox saying how they'll determine it on a case-by-case basis with Bethesda games, which really doesn't answer much. It could just mean existing ones stay on both platforms, new ones don't come to both platforms. The simple reality with this is we just don't know. I've seen a lot of people arguing that it could never happen because Microsoft would lose so much money by only offering Starfield on Microsoft consoles and PC, but the reality of that is Microsoft's going to probably make more money if you buy an Xbox to play Starfield and then continue to buy games on Xbox in the long run. Acquiring that additional market share is probably worth more than just releasing the game on PS5. They're spending a lot of money on acquiring additional market market share. And I for one think it'll almost certainly be a Microsoft exclusive when it actually does come out. But then there is also quite a bit of information or just rumors and speculation based off current information around when Starfield's marketing campaign or even release date will be, but mostly around marketing. Just recently in this interview, we still heard Todd Howard repeat that famous line, "They're going to show the game when it's ready," similar to what Pete Hines said at the start of this. But one factor that makes it seem like this game could be ready sooner rather than later is one, reportedly Sony was actually bidding on exclusivity of Starfield for the PlayStation 5, very similar to what we saw happening with Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop. Now, it doesn't inherently mean much, probably means it's at least somewhat closer to release, like a 2021 release date as many of us expect. But we also know from this interview that reportedly Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, and several other people from Xbox have already gotten pretty decent looks at Starfield, as Todd Howard mentions that people from Xbox have seen it. Now again, doesn't mean a ton considering Microsoft just purchased Bethesda, so they'd probably like to see what you're actually working on, how good or not good it looks. But one very interesting timeline could come later this year, starting the marketing campaign roughly 1 year ahead of time, because announcing that Starfield would be an Xbox exclusive or Microsoft exclusive could be a great way to win over people trying to decide whether or not to buy a PlayStation or an Xbox just before the holiday season. I'm sure a huge present this year will be one of the two new consoles, and this could easily fit in at a rumored additional Xbox event that apparently could be happening later this year. Alternatively, we have the Game Awards in December. Of course, if you want to advertise before people buy consoles, that is definitely on the late side. But one of the other tinfoil hat theories around Starfield and a potential release date is around Halo Infinite and the Bethesda website. So of course, we heard Halo Infinite was delayed, supposed to be one of the big launch titles for the next gen of consoles, but just 2 days before it was delayed, we saw the Bethesda website actually update, removing the board of directors. This was immediately called out as potentially being connected to an IPO or a sale or something going on. We heard in this interview again from Microsoft that the deal came to fruition to buy Bethesda this summer, so likely around that point maybe some things were finalized or it was agreed upon internally. It just got announced a bit later. So now the tinfoil hat speculation, what if Microsoft was okay with delaying Halo Infinite because they knew Starfield was just around the corner, coming out in Q2 of 2021? This type of release date isn't really supported by anything other than speculation. We know that Starfield has been in development to some degree for a long time. They started after Fallout 4's DLC. They were kind of co-developing Starfield and Fallout 76 at some point, but then they stopped work on Starfield to work fully on Fallout 76, but then returned to it. Bethesda also quadrupled in size after Fallout 4, so there's just a lot more manpower. I'm not really sure I'd buy into this theory, but that delay of Halo Infinite and the removal of the board of directors is a pretty big coincidence. And at the very least, I personally think there is quite a bit of support around the whole idea that we hear more about Starfield later this year, especially if it is going to be a console exclusive. I think that gives Microsoft a lot of incentive to actually tell people as they're about to buy a console. On release, Xbox doesn't really have a ton of great exclusives, especially when you look at Sony's lineup. And although Starfield won't act as a launch title, the idea that you could get it down the road with this system only could be pretty powerful, especially if it looks as good as everyone's saying it's supposed to look. Either way though, that's some of the recent rumors, speculation, and updates around Starfield from Bethesda. Still not a ton, but I think when you tie it all together, it's definitely some interesting things to think about. There was of course a lot of speculation in this video, a lot of it could just be wrong. The safe bet is without a doubt still holiday 2021, and I do think again the safe bet is it'll be a Microsoft exclusive, but who knows, maybe it's going to come out early 22 or even early 2021 on all consoles. Either way, hopefully you guys found this one informative. As always again, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.